Okay, welcome everyone. Mr. Amjad Khan, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you, Mark. Well, hello everyone. Good evening and welcome to this Know Your Rights and Bystander Intervention training. It's hosted by the LA Civil Rights, Human Rights and Equity Commission. My name is Amjad Khan. I'm an attorney and law professor here in Los Angeles. I practice law at Brown, Neri, Smith & Khan. I'm a partner there. Been practicing for almost 17 years, and I teach law at UCLA as well. And I'll be serving, have the privilege actually of serving as today's moderator. This training is available to anyone looking for more information on their rights and resources for stopping hate in our community. The trainings have been held on the last Tuesday of every month, and we're delighted to hold this final training. You can sign up for future training on the Commission's website. This is a very important topic. It's one that hits close to home for me as well. As hate continues to rise in many of our communities here in Southern California, for me in particular, the Muslim community that I belong to, we want to make sure that the community is aware of their rights and resources in addressing hate. And this cuts deep for so many communities. It's so deeply personal. And you'll hear from terrific speakers this evening about that as well. We know that hate is rising in Los Angeles. We have seen a 55% rise in reported hate crimes in the city of Los Angeles just in the past 5 years, since 2016. That's an astonishing uptick, with increases against ethnic and religious minorities, as well as members of the LGBTQ communities. So this is the last training, as I mentioned, and there's been over a dozen programs hosted by the LA Civil Rights Commission to respond to hate. This training is important because you will learn the difference and get to know the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident, which is a very crucial distinction as you're trying to vindicate the rights of others. You'll get to know resources available for victims of hate and discrimination, as well as tools for bystander intervention. So before I invite the speakers to present here, I just wanted to give a disclaimer. As a lawyer, it seems like I'm very used to giving disclaimers, but I'll give one more here. Please know that the views expressed during these presentations, this evening, and the views expressed by the LA Civil Rights Commission and the meetings or other events co-sponsored or sponsored by LA Civil Rights are just those of the speaker, and they're not necessarily of LA Civil Rights. Presentations at LA Civil Rights events or the presence of vendors at LA Civil Rights events does not constitute an endorsement of the vendors or speakers' views, products, or services. This presentation and anything discussed during this presentation should not be construed as creating or intending to create an attorney-client relationship. If you require legal assistance, you should immediately contact an attorney and we can help you with those resources. We will have time for questions at the end of this program, I hope. We'll try to commit to that. You can use the chat box here on Zoom and the Q&A feature to ask any question throughout the program, and we'll hopefully get to them. The training is hosted by the City of Los Angeles Civil Human Rights and Equity Department, as I mentioned, but also the Department of Public Works, the LA Police Department, and the Philippine American Bar Association. Very grateful for all of their participation. It's co-sponsored by the LA County Bar Association, the Filipino Worker Center, the Mexican American Bar Association, Equality California, the Anti-Defamation League, Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Southern California, the Japanese American Bar Association, the South Asian Bar Association of Southern California, the Southern California Chinese Lawyers Association, Parents, Educators, and Students in Action, and finally the Asian Pacific American Women Lawyers Association. So really a tremendous group of organizations. I know many of these organizations personally, know many people who work there. This is first-rate resources. Again, the training is open to all. We invite everyone to join or co-sponsor any future trainings as well. So with that introduction, I would now like to invite Capri Maddox, who is the Executive Director of LA Civil Rights, to say a few words. Capri?
Thank you so much, Amjad. LA Civil Rights is excited to bring you this training on stopping hate. We are happy to do this event and to highlight our Muslim community and in doing this, we're actually supporting all communities. And as Manju Kakarne of Stop AAPI Hate reminds us that hate crimes rose after 9/11, and we know that was 20 years ago, and we are still not at our pre-9/11 hate crime numbers for the Muslim community. As a point of personal privilege, I've been supported by many communities, but as I had the opportunity, I should say, I call it an opportunity to move around as a kid with my family. I wound up in an area in in junior high, where I was being bullied, and the Muslim community really supported me, allowed me to come to programming at their schools, etc. And just to have an outsider, as many of you know, I'm Christian by faith, member of First AME Church, but I was so welcomed and so supported in that environment. And 12, 13 years old, being new to a city, it's the experience that I will never, ever, ever forget, which is why when we hear about hate and discrimination against our Muslim brothers and sisters, a lot of times, as Umar knows, I just show up to the mosque because we really want to support all of our communities. This is our 6th training in the series, and many of our events we've hosted cover the needs of the transgender community, African American community, AAPI community, and many, many more Jewish brothers and sisters as well. So at LA Civil Rights, we believe in really being intentional about meeting discrimination and inequity and hate head on with resources to empower diverse communities. And that is why we launched the LA for All campaign, an anti-hate PSA, which is public service announcement campaign that has been translated into 17 languages and engaged all over even more than 4,000 ad spaces across LA. You may have seen it on buses, bus shelters, sanitation vehicles, thanks to our partners over at Public Works, et cetera. It is why we are also building the Office of Racial Equity and Discrimination Enforcement Programming, and much, much more that'll be launching soon. And this is really why we are hosting this training, to give you all the tools to keep yourself and your community safe. You can learn more about us at civilandhumanrights.lacity, and you can also follow us on any social media handle at LA Civil Rights. Thank you again for being here, and I want to remind you all to keep the faith and keep the fight.
Well, that's terrific. Executive Director Capri Maddox, thank you so much for sharing that. I actually spent some time on this website. I encourage everyone to go on the website. There's some amazing resources. As someone who's been in this space for a long time, I'm amazed to see how much useful material there is now. For many years, we didn't have a lot of these resources. We didn't have, distinctions explained to people so they understand how to vindicate their rights. That has changed now. This commission, LA Civil Rights, is really taking the lead in providing these resources under Capri's leadership. And I encourage everyone to follow them on Twitter. I do that as well. They post some essential information so that you feel like you have someone who has your back in this fight to stop hate. So we're really grateful for that. We normally would have a representative from the LAPD here present. We don't here tonight, but I wanted to take this opportunity to go into a distinction that's very important. And our next speaker also will touch on this, but I would want to sort of introduce this distinction. And that is between a hate crime and a hate incident. As an attorney, oftentimes, people who aren't attorneys use phrases that they may not understand the full import of the meaning of those phrases. And sometimes what you think might be a hate crime is not a hate crime. And so it's important to understand the distinction between a hate crime and a hate incident. So I want to take this opportunity to just share that distinction here on the screen. And this is a resource that you can find on LAPD's own website. And it's a very important resource. And, it's an education, even for us lawyers who've been in this space for a while. I've taken criminal law, worked in that space, doing pro bono work, but even these distinctions are sometimes lost on attorneys. So it's very important to understand this distinction. So obviously all hate is bad. We condemn all hate. We want to work to eradicate hate. But the question is whether there's resources available to fight hate crime. So what is the difference? So a hate incident is a non-criminal action or behavior that's motivated by bias, but it's legally protected by the First Amendment right to freedom of expression. So it's very important that we understand that certain hate speech, even certain hate conduct, is protected conduct. It's protected speech under the Constitution. And some of that might be things like epithets, the distribution of hate material in public places, the posting of hate material that doesn't result in property damage, the display of offensive material on one's own property. The Constitution of our country allows hate speech as long as it doesn't interfere with the civil rights of others. That's really the line. And of course, what is that line and how do you litigate that? That's of course the source of so many cases and so much precedent. If a hate incident starts to threaten a person or property, that's when it may constitute a hate crime. And so the definition of a hate crime is and this is the key distinction, it has a criminal aspect to it. It's any criminal act or attempted act directed against a person, public agency, or private institution based on the victim's actual or perceived race, nationality or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, disability, gender, or because the victim, agency, or institution is identified or associated with a person or group of with one or more of these protected characteristics. So examples of actual hate crimes are acts that result in injury, threats of violence, vandalism, and other destructive acts, harassment, including anonymous telephone calls, threatening letters, interruption of religious services at a mosque, at a synagogue, at a temple, at a church, threats made verbally in writing and by means of electronic communication devices, murder, of course. These are all examples of hate crimes. So how you spot this distinction, how you spot a crime is very important. And this resource explains that as well. There are signs for a possible hate crime. The criminal chose the victim or property because they belong to a protected group. I remember going to the mosque in Hawthorne, and there was an act of vandalism on that mosque. And we knew it was motivated by animus against Muslims because it used a hateful language against Islam. It also, ironically, favored one faith over another faith. And we knew it was done in the name of harming Muslims. So that, of course, what is a hate crime, and one that I personally reported, I remember years ago. Another example might be the criminal made written or verbal comments showing prejudice. The crime happened on a date that is important for the victim's protected group, like it happens on a Friday, which is important for Muslims, the holy day of Jummah, or it happens on Saturday and the Sabbath. That matters because it's motivated by religious bigotry. And there's a lot of organized hate activity in the area generally. And we've seen this, of course, in the national stage. We saw this in Charlottesville, right? In the most dramatic way, where you saw that in an organized way, there was a campaign of hate, something I had never witnessed in my entire life, but all of us witnessed for the first time, right? So it's an incredibly troubling trend. And it's one that needs to be spotted. And most importantly, and that's why we're holding this event, is you got to speak up. You got to act. And if you have any doubts about whether something happened to you as a hate incident or whether it rises to a hate crime, call someone, call any of us, get help to understand that distinction. So I wanted to share that with all of you. And now I'll turn to our next speaker. We're going to go into the rights and resources now for victims of hate, as well as bystanders and allies. Delighted to be joined by Adrian Rojas. He's a victims' rights attorney, so this is his expertise. Former LA County Deputy District Attorney, tremendous experience for a decade, and he's also the incoming president of the Philippine American Bar Association, known as PABA. Welcome, Adrian. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Amjad, for that introduction. Just in case you missed it the first time around, I do want to repeat the disclaimer that Amjad stated a few minutes ago, because we are lawyers, of course. The views expressed during this presentation made at the Civil, Human Rights, and Equity Department, also known as the LA Civil Rights. Meetings or other events sponsored or co-sponsored by LA Civil Rights are those of the speaker and not necessarily of LA Civil Rights. Presentations at LA Civil Rights events or the presence of vendors at LA Civil Rights events does not constitute an endorsement of the vendors or speakers' views, products, or services. This presentation and anything discussed during this presentation should not be construed as creating or intending to create an attorney-client relationship. If you require legal assistance, you should immediately contact an attorney. All right, now we got that out of the way. So here we are going on the second year into the pandemic, and hopefully we're seeing some sense of going back to normalcy. But unfortunately, even though we are going back into some sense of the way things were, we are still seeing a continued increase in hate incidents and hate crimes. And as Amjad explained a few minutes ago, a hate crime is in fact a criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. Now, in California, a hate crime requires more than just a racially motivated statement. So for example, while a statement such as, go back to where you came from, right? A statement like that might be classified as a hate incident. But in the criminal arena, there needs to be that statement plus a threat of violence or actual physical violence or destruction of property in order for it to be classified as a hate crime. Now, we've all seen the rise in hate incidents and hate crimes on the news and on social media as it relates to the Asian Pacific Islander communities and the Muslim communities. And we've seen enough of these incidents and crimes on social media. And there's usually a couple of commonalities that I've noticed and when we see these incidents on the news and social media. The first is that these incidents happen in public or in an open area, on a sidewalk, on a bus, or on a street corner. And the second common factor that I've noticed is that you see people standing out on the periphery, videotaping it, standing by, doing nothing, kind of just watching as these incidents turn into crimes and turn into brutal beatings and sometimes even deadly beatings. And when we see these incidents turn into hate crimes posted on social media, my reactions and my emotions are pretty genuine in that I always ask myself, what would I do if I were in that situation? And I always answer, I would have intervened, or I would have fought back. And usually I'm with my wife when we're watching these on the news or on social media, and she's even more aggressive, and she would say things like, I would have whipped out my pepper spray and I would have sprayed the heck out of that person attacking that poor victim. And I realized that we have that mindset. My wife and I have that mindset because both of us are attorneys. We have a basic understanding of self-defense laws. We have a basic understanding of defense of others. Now, for all of you out there, I'm pretty sure you're wondering, what can you do if you witness an attack? What can you do if you are a victim of an attack? And that's kind of what I want to cover here tonight during this presentation. Now, most of you might be familiar with the video that stemmed from San Francisco a few months ago. Earlier this year, it was an Asian lady. Her name was Miss Shea. She was a 76-year-old woman standing on the corner of Market Street in San Francisco, and she was brutally attacked. And we saw in this video how she grabbed a wooden stick and she started beating her assailant. And that kind of made it viral. It made it on the news. We also saw another video of a Filipino woman in New York who was brutally attacked as well on the sidewalk. In this particular video, we saw two men standing in the lobby of a hotel. And they were standing there, two pretty big men, doing nothing. And in fact, watching as this woman was being beaten up by the assailant and stomped on by the assailant, and in fact closed the glass door as this woman was being beaten 5 feet away, right? And it caused me to ask, myself, like, what are these people thinking? Are they wondering what are their rights? Are they worried about their rights if they were to intervene? Are they worried about their rights if they were to fight back? And God forbid that you are ever in that situation, but what are your basic rights under the law in California? And how does the law assess whether you were enacting in lawful self-defense or in lawful defense of others? Now, under California law, you have the basic right to defend yourself, obviously, and that basic right also extends to defending others. Under normal circumstances, now outside the context of self-defense, if you use force or deadly force on someone, then you could be criminally liable for a crime and charges would be brought against you by a prosecuting agency, such as a city attorney or the district attorney. However, if you acted in lawful self-defense, then you would not be liable for a crime, and that would be a complete self-defense. Self-defense is a legal defense that protects you from criminal liability altogether. Unfortunately, the law is very technical, but the general rule is that if it is lawful to use force when you reasonably and legitimately believe that you or another person are in imminent danger of physical harm, and that the use of force is necessary to stop the danger. Now, of course, that begs a question of what is lawful, what is legitimate, and what is reasonable under self-defense laws in California. In court, self-defense has three elements, and when the prosecutor reviews a file, they analyze the facts based on these three elements. Now, in order for you to be acting in lawful self-defense, the court will analyze whether you reasonably believe that you or someone else was in imminent danger of suffering bodily injury or was in imminent danger of being unlawfully touched. That's the first element. The second element is that you reasonably believed that the immediate use of force was necessary to defend against that danger, and you used no more force than was reasonably necessary to defend against that danger. Now, what does this all mean? The law will look into the imminent danger aspect, which means that the threat must be imminent, it must be immediate. The threat of harm must be happening at that moment. It can't be a future threat. Now, let's take that case that I talked about a few minutes ago of the elderly Asian woman who was standing on the corner of Market Street in San Francisco. She was being attacked at that moment by a young man who just unprovoked attacked this woman. Obviously, that attack was imminent. It was happening in that moment. And she grabbed that 2x4 stick and started defending herself. Now, in that case, the attack was happening and it was imminent and it was ongoing. Under that certain facts scenario, it was clear that she needed to defend herself. But if that man came up to her and said, "Next week, I will beat you up," if that threat was not imminent, she would not have reasonable grounds to defend herself at that point because the threat was not imminent or immediate. There has to be a clear and present immediate danger in order for you to utilize self-defense. The law will also look at whether a reasonable person acted the way, or whether a reasonable person would have acted under the similar circumstances. Now, if the answer is yes, then there's a strong argument that you acted in self-defense. The law will also look into the degree of force that you used. Now, the key word here is reasonable force. And I always argue that the force must be proportional to the threat of the harm that you are facing, or the threat of harm that someone else is facing if you are defending another person. Now, as a general rule, if someone came up to me and said, "Go back to where you came from," and started punching me, I would be justified in punching that person back. But if someone came up to me and said, "Go back to where you came from," and punched me, and I pulled out a gun and shot that person, I would question whether or not that was reasonable for me to shoot that person under that circumstance. unless there was some other factor to warrant shooting a person when I was being attacked just by one punch. Now, that's the proportionality aspect is always a question that the law, where the law is very difficult in terms of analyzing, because it's very fact driven. So my general rule is that if it has to be a proportional response when you want to use self-defense. Don't go overboard when you are responding in self-defense in protecting yourself or another person. Now, what if you witness an attack? What are your rights as a bystander? What if you decide to intervene? Let's take, for example, that case that I talked about a few minutes ago with the woman who was being attacked on the sidewalk in New York, where the two gentlemen were doing nothing. And they were standing in the lobby and they closed the doors, they closed the glass doors on the victim as the attack was ongoing. Self-defense laws apply the same way in that particular case. So if the two individuals wanted to prevent the attack, the self-defense laws would apply in that they have a right to defend a third party from further attack or from further harm. So the court would go into the same analysis that I talked about a few minutes ago. Now, in determining whether or not self-defense applies or defense of other applies, there are three things really that I want you to keep in mind. The first is that, are you in imminent danger of suffering great bodily injury? Is it reasonable for you to believe that the immediate use of force was necessary? And did you use reasonable or proportional force to the force that was being used against you? Now, I can't emphasize enough that this is a very basic and general overview of self-defense laws. And obviously, there's a lot of facts and nuances and factual differences that can change the outcome of whether or not self-defense is justified. But my general rule is that if you use more force than necessary, then you are not acting in justified self-defense. There are also other ways that you can defend or protect yourself that I want you to consider. And even though there are self-defense laws in place to protect you from criminal liability, I do want to stress that there are other steps that you can employ if you are being attacked or if you're witnessing an attack that are less violent and less lethal. And one of the most effective methods that I've known, that I've heard actually is the 5 Ds. And this is published by ihollaback.com. I did not make this up. I've heard this presentation many times, and it's actually, I've learned that it's a very useful way, very useful way to be able to kind of stop a situation that does not require you to put yourself in the attack. And the D's the 5 Ds involve distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. And these are all less violent methods. And I invite you to look at ihollaback.com. And to the extent that you are able to walk away and diffuse a situation, then that would be another alternative to responding with force. Obviously, the purpose of this presentation tonight is not to encourage physical contact, but it's important to know what your rights are if it does rise to a level where you are required to respond with physical contact. There are other non-lethal and completely legal self-defense weapons that are available to you in California. And I do want to stress that these are non-lethal because for the purposes of this evening, I'm not going to discuss gun laws. I specifically want to focus on non-lethal options. There are specific laws governing non-lethal self-defense weapons. And generally speaking, if you are an adult and as long as you have not suffered any prior convictions or there are no other court orders prohibiting you or disqualifying you from possessing these types of non-lethal weapons, then you can consider carrying pepper sprays. Costco a few months ago was selling pepper sprays, and as long as they're under 2.5 ounces, those are legal to carry. You can carry stun guns. There are specific provisions in terms of age. I think you have to be over 18 years old and you can't have any prior convictions. Those are legal to carry. I would recommend carrying personal alarms or whistles as means of deterrences. And knives. Knives can get a little tricky, but I do want you to look at Penal Code Section 21510, Penal Code Section 21510, that does outline and delineate the knives that are allowed and not allowed. Now, in terms of victims' resources, if you are attacked and once you make a report, under many circumstances, you have the right to have your request, you have the right to request your information to be kept from the public, and you also have the right to have certain portions of the report redacted from the public. And many police agencies, including LAPD, have victim resources available for you at the police station who can assist you in these types of requests. They also have victims resources and victims resource specialists available to you at the police station who can give you resources in terms of protective orders, restitutions, and any type of relocations or medical expenses if you had to pay out any out-of-pocket expenses or if you suffered any monetary losses as a result of being a victim of an attack. Additionally, I do want to stress that in California, under the Victims Compensation Board, each county is required to have a victims resource center, and it is county specific. So in LA County, the Victims Resource Center is housed at the LA County District Attorney's Office in downtown LA. And like I said, every county should have one. And at the DA's office, there is a staffer there who will help victims who make reports, find counseling, housing, prepare for court, apply for restitution, seek compensation for any out-of-pocket expenses, and get protective orders. So this is in addition to any victim resource representatives that are available at the police station. And in LA, I do have a contact. Her name is Monica Sebastian. She is one of the supervising victim resource representatives, and she has a wealth of resources, and she is ready and willing and able to provide any type of resources to anybody who has been a victim or witness of a crime. Now, as a victim or a survivor of a crime, you have a right to have an attorney present with you from the time that you make the police report all the way up until the time that you have to go to court, and all the way up until the time that this case is resolved through the criminal justice system. And these attorneys are often on a pro bono basis. Sometimes they do require payments, but a lot of the attorneys out here are representing victims on a pro bono basis, and you just have to find them, and they will be more than happy to represent you if you need that type of representation. And really what they're out there for is to make sure that you are protected in terms of your rights as a victim. Under California law, you have certain rights under Marcy's law, and those rights include the right to be informed of the charges against the defendant or against the accused. You have the right to be notified of all court dates. You have the right to be notified of the disposition or of the sentence. You have the right to make a victim impact statement in court if there is some type of plea or sentencing. And you have the right to be notified when the assailant is released from custody. And you also have the right to a protective order. So these are all types of rights that are afforded to you as a victim or a witness. And a Marcy's law attorney is someone who can help make sure that you have those rights protected if you are a victim or a witness. And lastly, as a crime, a victim or a witness, you are eligible to certain benefits under the Victim Compensation Board under California law. And this is a specific fund from the state fund, from the state level actually. And this is specific for victims who have suffered monetary losses resulting from the crime. And this will cover funeral expenses, medical expenses, relocation, or loss of income. So there are many levels of resources that are available to witnesses and victims from the county level, the city level, and the state level that are available to victims throughout each stage of the case. Since many of our audience members here are from the LA area, I do want to stress and put in a plug for the LA City Attorney's Office. Their website does have a victims resource page. It's helplacrimevictims.org. I believe our moderator here will probably send a link on the chat. They do have their website in 14 different languages, so just make sure you check that page out. And also the DA's office does have a very comprehensive victims resource page as well, where they will be able to help you in terms of getting all the services that I mentioned earlier, all the way from the county level to the state level. And I do want to end on this note. The reality is that if you are a victim or a witness of a crime, a hate crime or a hate incident, it's very humiliating, it's very alienating. You will be embarrassed, you'll feel isolated. But if anything, after tonight, I hope that you do feel a sense of empowerment, because there are rights, there are protections of the law that many of you don't know of, and hopefully that you now know and will be a stronger person because of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That's pretty comprehensive information. I mean, it's really impressive to get that level of an intake. I mean, particularly as it pertains to bystander rights and the idea that you can morally do the right thing, but also it being legally defensible when you intervene to stop a hate crime is very important information for us to know when we see hate crimes and are witnesses to hate crimes. There's so much line drawing that is done in these in this analysis, so it's very helpful to get a crash course in a limited amount of time from Adrian on that. So thank you so much for that. We have about 25 minutes left, and we have two more speakers. I want to leave 5 or 10 minutes for questions as well. I'll turn next to Umar Hakim. Umar is a dear friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years. He's worked in the Muslim faith and Muslim community for many years. He has served as executive director of the Intellect, Love, Mercy Foundation, or ILM, and is the founding principal of INKERIJ. It's pronounced INKERIJ, which is an advisory organization to restructure and reestablish relevant leadership perspectives. He is a true leader in the Muslim community and a leader for social change. He's worked with youth organizations, unhoused populations. He has this amazing event he holds that I've participated in for a number of years to give back to the homeless in Los Angeles. It's called International Humanitarian Day, which is an amazing event. He galvanizes so many communities. We're really delighted to have you here, Umar. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that, for those kind words. And in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, I'll open up. I want to thank LA Civil Rights for having me here. I would like to thank all the esteemed guests for all the information you've given me and everybody who has showed up. So since everybody has given their disclaimer, I have one. I have at least 5 or 4 lawyers who would defend me if I say anything wrong here. You know what I'm saying?
Got it.
So the words are mine, but my intention is good. You know what I mean? So you're gonna have to answer to a department, about 4 lawyers, and an organizer who is in the audience right now. So that's my disclaimer. As mentioned, my name is Umar Hakim Day. I'm the director for Intellect, Love, and Mercy Foundation, also the principal advisor for INKERIJ. And I'm here to represent the community. My mother, who came here in the 60s, she's a beneficiary of the Civil Rights Act passed. She came over from South America. And the comments, because she had a thick accent being from South America, the comments that she received from people who she perceived to be her own totally disrespected her. Totally, but at that time, she didn't really know, being new to the country or in the process of getting her citizenship, how to take action. So now that we have the LA Civil Rights Department here, we have a middle person who can advocate on our behalf, that could provide education. So in my community, there are 3 types of individuals that need to be represented. We are a very resilient community. We've been through so much in the last 400 years that sometimes we tend to wipe things off our shoulders and keep it pushing because we feel like nothing ever would get done. We have undocumented people in our community, like my mom was at one time. We feel like if we report something to the authorities that be, they would turn the tables and come take us away. And then we have those who need to build trust with law enforcement. So we don't really like to report things to law enforcement, because at times when we have called law enforcement as the victim, they detain us instead of the perpetrators. So, in that being said, this is an opportunity for me for us as community organizers, because a community organizer, for another role that I play here in Los Angeles. I'm the board president for LA Voice. LA Voice is a community organizer here to build power for Angelenos. What do I mean by building power? It's the type of power that you seek refuge under. It's the type of power that we want to share and build what's fair. It's the type of power that we seek justice and rally for justice for. So as a community organizer, my job is to agitate and or inspire. If I agitate someone, hopefully that'll lead to change. If we inspire someone, hopefully that'll lead to change. So this hate crime panel that's here, my man Adrian has very comprehensively defined and provided resources of what a hate crime is. You got your hate incident, you have your hate crime, then you have your hate speech. And what's interesting is that a hate incident and a hate speech is covered by the Constitution until it violates somebody's personal space or you threaten them with an action that could be detrimental to their life or their gender or their sexual orientation or their religion. So these type of trainings, we have to use them to educate our family, to educate our people. It's going to be very important that our community, since we don't like to call in, this is the opportunity to take the time to organize and utilize our partners as tools to advocate for our defense. So you have everybody who's here on this call, as well as the community partners and the community organizers, tap in with someone who is community organizing. Tap in with somebody who's at the city level. I believe there's resources will be added later on who you could call, such as 311. And you could call these numbers, you could call in anonymously and make a report. Unfortunately, my community don't like to report. So our numbers will probably be higher if we did report the incidents that happened to us. But due to the fact that we are resilient, due to the fact that we are undocumented, and that we don't trust the history of law enforcement for the way they have treated us, and we've seen over at least the past 2 years. This Saturday, we even gonna be rallied over at the Chuco Center for an event with Sister Khadija. It's a rally for justice. So we have the opportunity to take our justice in our own hands and advocate for what's right. But we must, and I'm gonna reiterate this, we must stand in solidarity and utilize the community partners on this call to help us get to the levels where we have never been successful at. So it's very important that we utilize not only this call, but these organizations for the education. Let's invite them to our communities so they could do workshops, know your rights workshops. That's one of the things I would like to do, you know what I'm saying? Know your rights workshops. But it's very, very, very important that our community now take the lead at advocating for ourselves. Because if we do not, nobody else will. And that's just my own humble opinion, because you have other communities who use people of color narrative to go far and beyond what we have yet to even scratch the surface on. We're stuck at a glass ceiling. So we have organizations, again, we have organizations that's willing to help us. We have a lot of information that's willing to help us, but we have to educate. We have to deal with education to create more awareness to make justice happen for us. For the sake of the call, I'm gonna end there. So, but again, I represent the resilient, the undocumented, and those who have no trust for the system. But now we're at a point where we could build power and scratch the halls of justice to hear our voice and recognize what we got going, like what we're gonna do this Saturday. So thank you for this opportunity to speak, and I'm gonna turn the conversation back over to Amjad. Thank you.
Umar, what an amazing distillation of a call to action. I mean, I encourage everyone on this call to spend some time with Umar offline. I mean, he lives his life by his example, and the amount of power you have in organizing in this city is immense. And you know, intervening for those who don't have a voice is very important. And the underreporting of hate incidences is a serious issue. It's an issue that I know affects the Muslim community that Umar belongs to, but it affects so many other communities as well. And we have to fix that. We have to be comfortable and empower others to report and to make sure that data is recorded. That's very essential. So I appreciate, Umar, all that you're doing. I appreciate this call for action. I appreciate, Khadija, the work you're going to do this weekend. And I encourage everyone who's watching this training, those who are on, who's going to watch this recording later, that it's very important to understand that we live in a very wonderful city, because the city of LA actually is leading the nation in a lot of these programs. I know that from having lived here and spent so much time engaged in the communities, that LA leads on a lot of these issues. So it's important to be empowered. Thank you, Umar, for that. Our last speaker is, we're actually really delighted to have a commissioner for the City of Los Angeles's Commission on Civil Rights, Abigail Zielenski. She's an attorney, president of the Philippine American Bar Association currently, and she covers civil rights, employment rights, and discrimination, particularly for the commission. Abigail?
Thank you, Amjad. And thank you to all the panelists who came before me, a lot of good information. My portion is going to be brief today. I'm going to discuss what you should do should you experience hate incidents in the workplace. If you experience discrimination or harassment or hostile work environment, then you have certain rights. And I want to talk about reporting with respect to those issues when it happens at the workplace. Before I get started, just a little bit about LA civil rights. While it's not yet able to take cases, when we do, we will be able to take complaints on discrimination in not just in employment, but also in housing, in education, and in commerce by private actors that happen within the city of Los Angeles. But in addition to the laws that protect you within the city of LA, there are workplace discrimination and harassment laws under California law and federal law. And there's a wide range of protected categories. And so, of course, that protects religion, but I think there are so many categories maybe people only know, like the big ones like race, sex, gender, religion. And so I just want to go down the entire laundry list of things that you are protected at work, you know, from discrimination and harassment. So it's not just your actual it's actual or perceived or association with these various categories. And so it's race, it's color, ancestry, national origin, language, citizenship, religion, religious creed. So that also includes religious dress and grooming practices, sex, but that also includes pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, related medical conditions related to pregnancy, gender, gender identity, gender expression, age if you're 40 and over, sexual orientation, veteran and military status, physical and mental disability, medical condition, including genetic characteristics, genetic information, and marital status. And there is a difference between discrimination and harassment. Both are prohibited under California law and federal law. Discrimination is when you're treated differently or unfavorably for belonging in a protected class or your association with that protected class. And so discrimination is going to have an adverse employment action. And so think of being fired or demoted or suspended, but it can also be lighter forms of adverse employment. So it could be put on a performance improvement plan, especially when your other coworkers for the same infractions maybe are not being put on a performance improvement plan. It can also include not being selected for a job. It can include being put in, in a bad work location or changed to a different work location. And so if this has happened to you and it was motivated by your protected status, then there may be a violation of the law and you should report it. And I'll talk about reporting resources in a couple of minutes. Unlawful harassment, which is a little bit different from discrimination. It is disrespectful and unprofessional conduct in the workplace. And this can take in the form of like verbal harassment, so slurs, jokes, gestures, teasing. It can be visual, like posters, symbols, drawings, computer displays, or emails, or physical conduct. So physically threatening another person, making physical contact in an unwelcome manner. So I think people normally think of, well, my boss or my manager or my supervisor cannot do this, but it also covers, your coworkers. Your coworkers should not be doing this. Third parties, vendors, customers, clients who come into the workplace should not be discriminating or harassing you. And so if your employer knows or should know that it's happening, they need to make it stop. So with respect to reporting, there are two agencies that you can report to. And there's a state agency, the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, and federal agency, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And I think our moderator, Mark, put it into the chat. There is a link on the LA Civil Rights page to get to the EEOC and to get to the DFEH. So you can file a complaint directly with the DFEH or the EEOC. My recommendation is if you do have to choose between the two, even though they have overlapping jurisdiction, it's not always the case, but oftentimes I would say go with the DFEH. There are more protected categories, the categories that I was talking about, that's under California law. And the statute of limitations, that means the time limit for you to be able to file a claim under the DFEH is a little bit longer than it is with the EEOC. But with anything that happens, always the sooner the better. And besides reporting to an agency, I would say report to human resources. If you don't have one, report to your supervisor, report to your manager. I would also recommend doing it in writing. In these types of situations, I think you can forget and if you feel uncomfortable, you can always bypass talking to your supervisor or to human resources and go directly to one of these agencies. You don't need a lawyer to do it. They're meant to help you and walk you through the process. But certainly, there are many attorneys that do this to help, people who have experienced hate incidents and harassment and discrimination at work. But I think the bottom line and the overall theme for today's panel is, please report. With that, I'm going to bring it back to you, Amjad. Thank you.
Thanks, Abigail. Very, very nicely done. Really important aspect is employment discrimination and various aspects to it. Again, know your rights. It's a difficult area of law, but if you really understand some of the basic resources, it'll go a long way. So we appreciate, Abigail, all your work on the commission and having this presentation that we can build off of and actually learn and engage with others who may have knowledge about this. There's many pro bono attorneys who provide pro bono services in this space as well. I know, so we're at the end of our time. We're actually at 6:30, but we want to allow just a few minutes here to go over. Everyone's welcome to stay just for some questions. I know Lionel Maris had a question here on the chat, which I think, Adrian, you responded to, but I'll ask it again just in case. If you witness someone getting attacked, can you step in to defend that person? Will that be considered an act of self-defense? I know you touched on bystander law. You want to add anything on that, Adrian?
Yeah, it's actually, I did touch on that. The same laws apply if you were to defend another person. Self-defense does apply to defense of others, as long as you act proportionally, the threat is imminent, and you respond in a reasonable fashion.
Great. We can open it up here. Umar, you wanted to add something on that?
I just want to add something really briefly.
Sure.
In today's age of technology, you can also utilize your camera to record that, because people like to shy away from being recorded or doing shameful things.
Correct. That's a good point. Very important point. Are there any, if anyone wants to ask a question, I think you could unmute yourself. Mark, is that okay? Take some audience questions. Great. Let's get some questions. If anyone has any particular questions, you got some experts here on the call. If anyone has any thoughts or questions or concerns, please raise them. We encourage you, of course, to get all these resources. Mark has posted some. Okay, I think Vera has a question here. Vera, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I have a question for Abigail. If we have issues, should we go to our union first? Because I work in a place where we have a union. If that doesn't work, then I should be calling or looking at the websites that you offer, correct?
Yes. So if you belong to a union, in all likelihood, you have a collective bargaining agreement that covers harassment and discrimination in the workplace. And it's likely going to have a particular section in there that talks about a grievance procedure. And so I think, my general recommendation would be to go to your union first so that they could deal with it with management. You should also be able to report directly to human resources, but nothing ever stops you from going directly to the DFEH and the EEOC in addition to that. But I just want to highlight that if you are a union employee, the collective bargaining agreement is going to have a particular procedure on how they want that complaint processed.
Great information, Abigail. Thank you. Any other questions here on the chat? Anyone want to ask a question, raise a hand? Welcome to. You can also ask it in Spanish. We have bilingual capability here tonight as well. Anyone have any other questions or comments? Well, I'll just say here at the end how privileged I am to have moderated this. I want to stress again that this commission was set up for these resources. Capri is leading this effort. This is something really special for a city to have, particularly for those who have endured hate. for many years. I mean, I went to law school. The first week of law school was the 9/11 attack. I was a first-year law student, and as a Muslim, probably had maybe 2 Muslims in my entire section at Harvard. It was a very difficult time for me. And I remember trying to navigate in the city of Boston this atrocity that happened as a Muslim, and realizing that even in a place like Cambridge and Harvard, there were very limited resources. And I'm looking back over 20 years, and in the city I grew up, not only do we have resources, we have people here who are advocating for other faith communities, you know, outside of their own communities. And we have people who are squarely focused on intervention to prevent hate crimes. The problem is the uptick in hate crimes has to be met with that same level of engagement. That's why people like Umar are working, you know, in community organizing, call to action. It's so important. So it's very heartening to see this arc of engagement from this city. And we hope and pray that everyone who's a victim of hate crimes has the justice they seek. So we appreciate that very much. I'm looking here. I think I see a question from Khadija. I want to make sure I ask that. It's what if your complaint is against law enforcement? Good question. What is the recourse? Anyone want to take that? If you have a complaint against law enforcement, what would be the approach?
I think Mark placed information regarding the Office of the Attorney General, and the Attorney General is set up to deal with these issues as it relates to LAPD. But I think that's important for the link to be made for the community. And if you have any further questions outside of the link, definitely you can reach out to us. Thank you. And we'll just redirect you. We don't handle those issues, but we can direct you to the proper place. Thank you.
Yeah. Edwina Hunter, thank you for that. Edwina Hunter also posted a comment, and I just want to make sure I read that. I've been approached twice by citizens in my department area. Both times the contacts were threatening to my physical being. The department doesn't seem to see this type of action other than taking it out against the employee. So, you know, obviously a really legitimate concern, terrible. Any of you want to comment on that? I'm sure, Umar, you've heard some of these same types of concerns in the community.
Yeah, the workplace situation is really tough. So I'm pretty sure Abigail has more insight on that than me.
Yeah. Abigail, any thoughts on that concern? I've heard that in a few places as well.
I know Abigail was having, Commissioner Zielenski was having technical difficulties.
Okay. No worries.
So, but one thing I just wanted to be clear is some of the resources that have already been in the chat about the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. Particularly if it's in the private sector, if you have a local union that you work with, you can go through the complaint process in that manner. But basically the information that she shared about discrimination in any work setting could be used depending on your situation, depending if you have a union, if not, or you can even reach out to private legal counsel as well.
So Edwina, make sure you email us about this. If this is escalating, if you're feeling vulnerable, if you're concerned, don't just let it sit inside you. Ask questions. We can try to get you in the right resource. We can evaluate the situation and help in any way we can, I'm sure. But thank you for that comment. Well, we really appreciate it. I think, Mark, at this stage, we're over time. But if anyone has any further comments or questions, please contact us. We'll either answer it ourselves or we'll route you to the right resource. But thank you, everyone. We want to thank the City of Los Angeles, the LA Civil Rights Commission, just tremendous work here, all of the co-sponsors for making this training series possible. For more information, go on the civilandhumanrights.lacity.org/LA for all website. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
LA for all.
LA for all. Thank you. Great job, John.